In 1985, divers off Cape Cod brought up a bronze bell. It carried a name, the Whydah Gally, 1716. That bell did something a legend cannot do. It identified the wreck. The question is not whether Sam Bellamy became famous. The question is what the Whydah wreck proves, what it does not prove, and which parts of the legend survived only because the ship stayed buried for 268 years. Visual reconstructions are AI-assisted and based on historical records. Start with the object. The Whydah Gally was a London-built vessel tied to the Atlantic slave trade. In 1716 and early 1717, its route moved through the commercial world that made piracy profitable. England, West Africa, Jamaica, the Bahamas, and then the North American coast. The ship had carried enslaved Africans to Jamaica. After that sail, it carried the proceeds and commodities of that system back toward London. Near the Bahamas in early 1717, pirates under Samuel Bellamy captured it. The evidence is not a romance scene. It is a ship changing hands inside a trade network built on human exploitation, maritime labor, and movable wealth. The Whydah was not important only because pirates took it. It was important because the ship already concentrated the Atlantic economy in one hull: human trafficking, West African gold, Caribbean plantation money, European commerce, and the violence that guarded all of it. Bellamy did not create that world. He entered it. By April 1717, the Whydah was moving north along the American coast. Contemporary and later official accounts place the wreck off Cape Cod on April 26. The weather and exact sequence differ across retellings, but the hard outline is stable. The fleet encountered severe conditions. The Marianne came ashore farther south. The Whydah struck the shoals near what is now Wellfleet. The ship broke up close to land. Almost everyone aboard died. The numbers vary in the sources. Southack's map note says he buried 102 drowned men. Modern summaries often describe nearly 150 people lost. A Massachusetts legal appendix gives 144 dead and 2 survivors. The wreck killed nearly all aboard, and the surviving records preserve only a few named men with clarity. 2 survived: Thomas Davis and John Julian. Davis was a ship's carpenter. Earlier in Bellamy's career, he had been taken from a vessel called the St. Michael. At the Boston trial, he argued that he had been forced aboard. The court accepted the argument. Davis was one of 2 acquitted out of 8 indicted. The other acquittal was Julian. The printed trial pamphlet identifies him as Indian. Later sources connect him to the Mosquito Coast of Central America and describe him as a pilot, the man who knew the shoals well enough that the crew had relied on him. The court's verdict on Julian was the same as on Davis, acquitted on the same forced aboard argument. The handling after the verdict was not the same. The contemporary record on what happened to Julian after the acquittal is hedged. Later accounts that describe him sold into servitude despite the court's ruling are not corroborated by a clean primary source. The silence is part of the evidence. So the case has 3 men the legend keeps trying to use, and 2 of them did not become legends. Bellamy is dead before the court can try him. Davis is the man the court can acquit. Julian is the man the court treats differently after the verdict than the verdict says it should. The trial that followed the wreck was held in Boston in October 1717. The printed pamphlet gives the formal shape: 8 indicted, 2 acquitted, Davis and Julian, 6 found guilty. Massachusetts Historical Society material names the 6 men executed on November 15, 1717, John Brown, Simon Van Vorst, Hendrik Quintor, Thomas Baker, Peter Hoof, and John Schuon. Popular Whydah stories want the captain. The surviving legal record gives us defendants, pleas, verdicts, and a public execution. The legend keeps trying to pull the camera back to Bellamy. The record keeps pulling it toward the men who survived long enough to be judged. After the wreck, Governor Samuel Shute tried to claim the recovered goods for the crown. He sent Cyprian Southack, a mariner and mapmaker, to the site. Southack's expedition did not recover the treasure the government wanted. Local residents had reached the beaches first. Southack did leave something more useful than treasure. He left a map note. On a later printed version of his coastal chart, Southack marked the place where he had gone by whaleboat to look after the pirate ship Whydah, Bellamy commander, cast away on April 26, 1717. He also recorded the burial of 102 drowned men. That note is a map speaking in the grammar of an official errand: order, place, wreck, commander, dead. For more than 2 centuries, that was the kind of record the Whydah had. Printed trial material, ministerial accounts, newspaper notices, government orders, local memory, and maps. Then came the search. Barry Clifford and the team associated with Maritime Underwater Surveys located the wreck site off Wellfleet in the 1980s. The 1988 Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court case over rights to the wreck records the legal dispute that followed, and its appendix repeats the geography that framed the find. The Whydah had foundered on the shoals, Southack had mapped the site, and the modern search had used that map. A cannon or coin can suggest a wreck. A scatter of artifacts can fit a story. A bell with the vessel's name and date narrows the room. The Whydah Pirate Museum's educational material states that Clifford's team recovered the bronze bell in 1985, and the inscription confirmed the wreck as the Whydah of historical record. Guinness World Records repeats the identification logic. The bell bore the name and the 1716 date. The bell proved one thing with unusual force. This wreck site is the Whydah. It did not prove Bellamy's motives. It did not prove a romance. It did not prove Johnson's speech. It proved the wreck's identity, which is enough, and which is also the boundary. That boundary is the reason the cargo matters next. More than 200,000 artifacts have been reported from the site. Museum material describes coins, weapons, navigation instruments, sailing equipment, jewelry, clothing pieces, carpenter's tools, kitchenware, gaming tokens, smoking pipes, and other objects from the ship. And then a 2026 study did something the bell could not. In 2026, an open access study in NPJ Heritage Science used the Whydah's Akan gold assemblage, more than 300 items recovered from the wreck, as a rare archaeological context. The researchers examined 70 pieces and selected 27 for elemental analysis using PXRF and SEM-EDS. The results showed the gold to be high purity and inconsistent with the European written claim that West African traders systematically adulterated their product. European trade documents from this period are full of complaints about adulterated African gold and unreliable weights. Those complaints were the cover under which the trade was repriced, renegotiated, and morally framed. The Whydah's seabed assemblage is the rare test case the complaints can be measured against. Up to this point in the case, the question has been about Bellamy and the wreck. What did the legend say? What did the artifact answer? The gold reframes the question. It is no longer only what the wreck proves about the pirates, it is what the cargo testifies to about the people the wreck never names. The Akan gold on the Whydah's seabed survived inside a European trade narrative that called West African traders dishonest. The PXRF data did not match the narrative. 2 centuries of complaint about adulterated African gold ran into 27 elementally analyzed artifacts and lost. That is a different question than the cold open promised. And it is the question the second half of this episode follows. Put that beside the legend. The most famous Bellamy material comes through the Johnson source family, the 1720s general history tradition that shaped pirate memory more than any other printed source. In that tradition, Bellamy gives Captain Beer a speech about rich men robbing under cover of law, while pirates rob under their own courage. It is vivid. It is quotable. It is exactly the kind of line later writers wanted. But this detail comes from Johnson's general history tradition. No trial record, ship log, or contemporary newspaper opened for this packet confirms that Bellamy said it. The records show a captured vessel, a wreck, surviving defendants, a trial, executions, and a failed official salvage mission. Johnson gives the speech. The trial gives Davis and Julian. The same discipline applies to Maria Hallett. Many popular tellings pull Bellamy toward Cape Cod because of a young woman and a romance. The Massachusetts Historical Society blog is blunt about the uncertainty. If Maria existed in the form the legend needs, the historical record does not give us that proof. It is more likely, the piece argues, that the pirates were moving north to trade illicit goods with merchants in ports such as Newport, Connecticut, New York, and Boston. That does not make the romance impossible. It makes it unusable as the spine of a reconstruction. So the episode refuses the obvious framing. Bellamy's nickname, the romance and the speech belong in the myth layer. The wreck, trial, map note, cargo, and artifacts belong in the reconstruction. The ship was captured in a commercial corridor. It wrecked on a coast whose shoals were dangerous enough to be mapped carefully. The local population encountered the wreck not as a tale, but as bodies, debris, and valuable goods on the beach. The colonial government saw a claim for the crown. The court saw piracy defendants. Cotton Mather saw condemned men. Southack saw a failed salvage mission and a place to mark on a chart. Clifford's team saw a search problem. The Akan gold became an Atlantic trade question altogether. There is an ethical edge to this case too. The Whydah had been a slave ship before it was a pirate flagship. Treating its cargo only as pirate treasure strips the ship of the economy that loaded it. The museum's guide and the 2026 study both pull the case back toward that economy. Enslaved Africans sold in Jamaica, West African gold moving through trade networks, European buyers, colonial markets, and sailors caught between wage labor and outlaw opportunity. That does not absolve piracy. It explains the sea in which this case happened. The Boston aftermath sharpens it again. The trial did not put Bellamy on stage. Bellamy was dead. The court dealt with the men the sea had left alive, Davis, Julian, and the 6 who were not acquitted. And the printed pamphlet made them legal subjects before it made them characters. Davis went home a free carpenter. Julian's freedom did not last in the same way the verdict said it should. The 6 condemned men walked to execution in Boston on November 15, 1717. Cotton Mather's account adds a different kind of pressure. He did not write like an archaeologist, and he did not write like a later adventure author. He wrote as a minister watching condemned men become a public lesson, and the printed sermon that followed the gallows became part of how New England remembered the case. Mather gives the execution a moral frame. The trial gives it a legal frame. The wreck gives it a material frame. The cargo gives it a 4th frame the trial could not reach. An argument about the people who produced the gold the pirates were carrying. For 268 years, the physical ship remained mostly below the sand. Then the bell came up. The legend asked for a captain. The wreck answered with a ship. The bell is the key noun of the case because it changed who had authority. After 1985, the Whydah story no longer belonged only to the storytellers. It had to share the room with the artifact. And with 27 beads of high-purity West African gold that the Atlantic trade had been arguing about for 200 years,